got Dong. So do you want to get your slides prepared?
Thank you very much for having this opportunity. And today I would like to present the paper Climate Change Disclosure and the Analyst Forecast, Evidence from the Textual Analysis. Firstly, why the climate change disclosure matters. So in recent years, climate change have resulted in two types of the risk, the physical risk and the transition risk. So this risk negatively affects the firm's sales and the profitability. Additionally, investors have the difficulties in understanding the climate risk exposure by the firms when making the investment decisions and selecting the portfolio firms due to the lack of the climate change disclosure. So given this, there is the increasing demand for the more transparent information about the climate change issues. So in response to this growing demand, the TCFD, the Task Force Financial Climate-related Financial Disclosures in 2017 published a set of the recommendations which center around the four categories: the governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. So I would like to discuss these four categories later in the literature review part. And nearly 4,000 organizations, including 3,700 companies, have been TCFD supporters across the over 100 countries and jurisdictions. And more importantly, some standard setting institutions such as the CDP, the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, and the International Sustainability Standards Boards have incorporated TCFD recommendations to their existing reporting framework to help standardize and uniform climate change disclosures. So this standard and consistent climate change disclosure will help investors to make the effective investment decisions. The motivations. So our study tried to relate the climate change disclosure to analyst forecast, because the financial analyst, as the important financial information intermediary in capital markets, plays the important roles in gathering the useful information and making the earnings forecast to the investors. And the existing literature review have linked the CSR disclosure to analyst forecast, especially in Deliver in 2011 and 2012. However, little is known about the direct relationship between the specific climate change disclosure and the analyst forecast, even if the CSR disclosure may contain some of the climate change information, especially for the category level climate change disclosure, such as climate-related governance, climate-related strategy. So this category level disclosure have not been explored yet. So this could be attributed to the two reasons. Firstly, the climate change disclosure induce the direct and indirect cost, so leading the companies to be unwilling to fully disclose the climate change information. Secondly, the voluntary nature result in the disclosure practice that are inconsistent and incomparable, being the major obstacle for the information user to assess climate risk exposures. So based on the TCFD recommendations, we perform the textual analysis of the annual report and construct the aggregate and the category level climate change vocabularies. So using this vocabularies, we estimate the aggregate and the category level climate change disclosure scores at the firm level. So this details have been reviewed in my another paper. And using the climate change disclosure scores, we investigate if the analysts infer the useful information from this disclosure to improve the earnings forecast. That's my the main questions. So contributions. So our paper contributes to the existing literature that examine the relationship between the non-financial disclosure and the analyst forecast. So as mentioned before, complementing the CSR disclosure studies, we focus on specific the climate change disclosure and find the consistent results that the analysts assess the climate change disclosure to improve the earnings forecast. We also provide the deeper insight into the category level climate change disclosures. And secondly, our paper extends the recent studies relating the climate events to the analyst forecast. So the analysts are likely to downgrade their earnings forecast for the companies being affected by the weather conditions and the climate activism events because of the reduced profitability. And the Kukulisa in 2021 also reports that the pessimistic earnings forecasts are issued during the periods of the increase in the temperature. So different from these studies, we focus on the climate change disclosure on the annual report instead of the climate events. Let's review. We start from the land and the long home in 1996. So they argue that increased information disclosure are helpful for the analyst forecast because they argue that the increased disclosure can reduce the analyst motivation of the rely on the private information to make the earnings forecast. So this reduced the motivation could improve the information sharing and reduce the disagreement among the analysts. And also, if the information are informative regarding the future performance, they argue that the increased disclosure could be reduced the forecast errors. So because the TCFD recommendations have the different focus on the climate change risk, so we try to link the category level disclosure to the analyst forecast by the reviewing the relevant studies. So in terms of the governance, so what does the governance tell us? So for example, the companies are encouraged to disclose the information, such as if the company has the sustainability committee or the environmental committee that are responsible for the climate change issues, or if these sustainability committees have assigned climate-related responsibility to the management position levels. And the disclosure under the strategy category focuses on the identification of the climate risk and the opportunities, such as the physical risk, the extreme weather and the sea rising levels, and the transit risk, such as the carbon price and the carbon policies, as well as the financial implications of the climate risk on the firm future performance, such as the operation cost, supply chains, and the products. So the risk management focuses on how the organizations address and identify the climate risk. And for example, if the company identifies the climate risk and as the mature risk, is the climate risk incorporated into the overall risk management process, just similar to the other significant financial risk. And the last one is the metrics and targets. Obviously, metrics and targets focus on the carbon emission, right? So the firms are encouraged to disclose some of the key metrics, and the total carbon emission or the carbon intensity could be the two of the most widely used metrics for the companies, as well as the scope 1, scope 2, and the scope 3 if possible. Okay, the governance. Why is the governance important to analysts? So the corporate governance is relevant to analysts in assessing disclosed information quality. This importance could be attributed to the financial disclosure integrity and the role of the governance disclosure in reducing information asymmetry. So the BOT in 2006 and we in 2010 show that the governance disclosure facilitates analyst assessment of the financial information quality and credibility, thereby reducing the financial the forecast errors and dispersions. So in terms of the environmental disclosure, the firms with the sustainability or the committee or the environmental committee can ensure the disclosed information quality. So overall, the more the governance disclosures are useful for analysts to assess the climate change information quality and make the less disputed and more accurate earnings forecast. So the strategy. So as discussed before, the strategy focuses on the climate risk identification and the financial implication of the climate risk. So this significant effects have attracted analysts' attentions, right? And this, for example, the analysts downgraded the earnings forecast for this affected companies, and this downgrade revisions also indicates the more accurate earnings forecast. So we argue that the climate change disclosure under the strategy category can facilitate the analyst information integration through a better understanding of the financial implications. The risk management category. So the firms with the strong risk management category on the environmental issues gain the benefits in the capital market. So this risk management focuses on the two aspects. One is the risk management activities. Another one is the risk materiality assessment. So the environmental activities as a proxy for the better risk management reduce the cost of the capital and also increase the firm valuation. And the count in 2016 demonstrates that the firms with the high rating on the sustainability issues materiality, which reflects the better risk management, also have the better future performance. So the TCFD in 2017 encouraged firms to conduct a risk materiality assessment when determining whether the climate risk is incorporated into the overall corporate risk management process. So the Kroger in 2020 argued that the climate risk materiality has a positive effect on the climate risk management. And the Flores in 2019 showed that the risk materiality is particularly relevant to analysts because the firms are required to disclose what really matters to the investors and to the market participants, which alleviates the information load, also improve the information quality. So if the firm discloses information about the climate risk management activities, as well as climate risk materiality assessment, the analysts will incorporate this information into their forecast models and, of course, improving their earnings forecast. The last one is metrics and targets. So firms are recommended to disclose some of the key metrics which are tailored to measure the climate risk. And among the environmental metrics, the carbon intensity and the total carbon emission receive the particular attentions. For example, the stock market imposes the penalty on the valuation of the firms with a high carbon emission. However, the firms benefit from the carbon emission disclosure. For example, in 2021, the bottom showed that the firms with the carbon emission disclosure have the lower cost of capital because the carbon emission disclosure can reduce the information uncertainty. So therefore, we expect the carbon emission disclosure convey the very relevant information to capital markets as well as the analysts. So the Dow, Marshall, and Rees in 2016 found a significant reduction in analyst forecast errors for the companies with the carbon emission disclosure, because the analyst can assess the future cost and the benefits regarding the carbon emission through the disclosed information. So overall, the disclosure under the metrics and targets category, which contains the information on the carbon emission, are likely to be useful for the analyst to assess the firm's future performance, the cost, and the benefits. Okay, hypothesis development. The climate change disclosure conveys the important information through which the analyst can assess the disclosed information quality, as well as the financial implications of the climate risk. So we propose the first one. There is a negative relationship between the aggregate, the climate change disclosure, and the analyst forecast errors and dispersions. So this aggregate disclosure contains the overall information, including the governance, the strategy, risk management, and the metrics and targets. And as discussed before, the category level climate change disclosure are predicted to enhance the analyst forecast. So we construct the second one. There is a negative relationship between each the category level climate change disclosure and the analyst forecast errors and the dispersions. And finally, the TCFD is viewed as the international convergence of the climate change reporting to the high standard. There, the TCFD supporting status may be the signal of the commitment to high quality disclosure. So we predict that the more pronounced effect of the climate change disclosure on the analyst forecast. The sample and the data. So we choose a multiple country sample, including the Australia, the UK, the Canada, the France, and the US. So because these 5 countries have implemented the series of the guideline to help the companies disclose the climate change information, and they also the TCFD supporting countries. We would discuss another special case, the Japan, at the end. And another reason is the companies in these 5 countries publish the annual report in English, which is the common language for the textual analysis. And the sample firms. So we select the largest companies in each country based on the main index, the market index. For example, the ASX 300, the FTSE 350, and the Russell 3000 in the US. We also require these companies to account for at least 95% of the total market cap. And the data source, we obtain this data from the Refinitiv, and we collect the annual reports for the US companies from the EDGAR, and the annual reports for the non-US companies from the Refinitiv workspace and the company's website. So note that we focus on the English version, the annual report for the French companies, because usually the French companies publish the 2 versions annual report, the English version report and the French version report. So we delete the financial firms and the firms without any climate change information in the annual report. So finally, the sample consists of the 1721 unique firms and the 8829 firm year observations between the 2010 and the 2019 year. Dependent variables. So the interest of variables is climate change similarity scores, the CCSS. So it's estimated as the cosine of the TF, the term frequency inverse document frequency scores. And I briefly discussed the 3 main steps here, because there's more details have been reviewed in another paper. So in step 1, we developed the climate change vocabulary from the TCFD supporters reports. In step 2, we match the vocabulary with the past and the cleansed text from the annual report. And step 3, we compare the keywords with the climate change vocabulary to compute the TF-IDF. So using the category level vocabulary, we also estimate the category level disclosure scores, so which represent the governance, the strategy, risk management, and the metrics and targets. So I would say the climate change disclosure measures is inspired by the Angus paper in 2020, but carries some of the difference. So one of them is the climate change vocabulary. So in Angus paper in 2020, the climate change vocabulary includes some rules, the general rules regarding the carbon emission. In other words, there's a limited words regarding the climate-related governance, the strategy, and the risk management. So the climate change vocabulary, comprise the comprehensive information. For example, the risk management, the transition risk, physical risk regarding the strategy category, the scenario analysis, the low carbon and the scope emission. And the next, the independent variables. So we use the forecast errors and the dispersions over the different forecasting period. And here, the forecast errors is defined as the average value of the absolute difference between the analyst forecast consensus and the actual earnings divided by the adjusted stock price at the beginning of the year. The forecast dispersions is measured by the average value of the standard deviation of the analyst forecast and divided by the stock price. So the regression models, we construct the regression models relating the CCSS to the forecast errors and the dispersions. And in hypothesis 2, we replace the CCSS with the category level disclosure measures, the GOST, RM, and MT, which represent the disclosure measures under the different categories. And in terms of the hypothesis 3, we introduce a dummy variable of the support, which equals 1 if the company is the TCFD supporters in the year, otherwise 0, as well as its interaction item with the CCSS. So this control variables will be discussed at the end in the appendix. All right. So the statistic. So as we can see from this table, the forecast errors and the dispersions increase with the forecasting period. So it makes sense because because there will be the limited information available for the analyst to make the earnings forecast for the longer forecast period, right? And another thing I would like to share is the percentage of the supporters in our sample. There's only 1.5% of the TCFD supporters in our sample, right? Because these companies will express their supporting for the TCFD recommendations after 2017. All right. Okay, regression result in terms of the actual one. So we can observe the significant relationship between the CCSS and the forecast errors and the dispersions in all regression models, right? So this result suggests that the increased climate change disclosure help the analysts obtain the better understanding on the financial implications around the climate change in the short term and the long term period. So which is consistent with the definition of the forecast errors based on the Lang and the Langholm in 1996. And similarly, the increased climate change disclosure help reduce the difference in earnings forecast because the high level of the climate change information can reduce the analyst's reliance on the private information, thereby leading to a reduced disagreement among the analysts. In terms of the hypothesis 2, we perform the category level examinations, and we find the governance and the risk management are significantly and negatively associated with the forecast errors as well as the forecast dispersions. So these results are consistent with the bar in 2006, the U 2010, and the Flores in 2019. And the strategy category level. So here we can find the significant and the negative relationship between the ST and the forecasted errors, but not for the forecasted dispersions. Because as we know, the disclosure under the strategic category focus on the financial implication of the climate risk. So based on the law and the law in 1996, if the disclosure are informative regarding the future performance, so we expect the increased disclosure can reduce the forecasted errors. So it makes sense, right? And interestingly, we didn't find any relationship between the MT and the forecasted errors and the dispersions. This could be attributed to the two reasons here. So the analysts care more about the carbon emission data, amount, instead of the texture text regarding the carbon emission, right? They care about how much the company emit the greenhouse gas emission, right? And the second reason could be the analysts are likely to use the emission data from the CDP database or the other database, because it's difficult to track the information on the carbon emission in annual reports. That could be the second reason. And the third hypothesis, in terms of the interaction item, the supporting status and the CCSS, we find the significant relationship over the short-term forecasting period, but just at the 10%. So this could be the reason, there is a limited number of the TCFD supporters in our sample, just accounting for 1.5%. We also conduct additional tests to robust our the main results. Firstly, the Heckman two-step test, because in our sample we exclude the companies without any information, climate change information in annual report. There could be a possibility that the companies disclose the climate change information in other reports, for example, the sustainability report instead of the annual report. So this deletion of the companies with the climate change information in other reports can result in, the sample selection bias. So in the first step, we run the the regression model, and we introduce the inverse Mills ratio, which indicates the sample selection bias in the second step. All right, and we still find the significant and a negative relationship between the CCSS and the forecast errors and the dispersions. Next, we also conduct the country level analysis, because there could be the concern that our main results are driven by the observations from maybe just only one country, or there's no relationship in each country. So to address this concern, we conduct the country level analysis, and we find the significant relationship between the CCSS and the forecast errors in Australia, in UK, and in Canada. We also find a significant relationship between the CCSS and the forecast dispersions in Australia and the UK. In other words, our main results are driven by the observations from at least one country, maybe the multiple countries. And we also use the forecast bias as the alternative measure of the climate of the earnings forecast. Okay, and we still find some significant relationship. I think maybe I would be running out of time. Just last one. So the levels of the climate change disclosure. So the idea is we expect the companies with the lower climate change disclosure will have the same result as the companies without any climate change information. So based on this idea, we sort the companies into the three groups: the high, the medium, and the low level. And we find the consistent results with our prediction. So the firms with the low climate change disclosure will have the same effects on the as the firm without any climate change information. And the conclusions, and last one, just last one. And I would like to discuss the limitations, because we only consider the annual reports and omit the sustainability reports. Some companies are likely to disclose more in the sustainability report and less in the annual report. And also, we just include the firms with the annual report published in English, so which result in the Japanese firms being deleted. And in terms of the future research, we could use maybe the TCFD borders as the alternative of the disclosure measure, because more and more companies have been TCFD borders. All right. And the controllables. Okay, that's it. Thank you.